The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Clarence's house, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs that Camilla had carefully chosen years ago. She sat at her mahogany desk, reviewing the day's schedule with her private secretary. Royal engagements filled the calendar: a children's hospital visit, a charity luncheon, and an evening reception for Commonwealth dignitaries. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary, exactly as it had been for countless mornings before. Camilla reached for her teacup, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted it to her lips. The tremor was so subtle that even she barely noticed it. She attributed the slight shake to too much caffeine and made a mental note to switch to herbal tea after lunch. The thought crossed her mind briefly before disappearing into the busy momentum of royal duties. Her lady-in-waiting knocked gently before entering. "Your Royal Highness, the car will be ready in 20 minutes for the hospital visit." Camilla nodded, gathering her notes and handbag. As she stood, a wave of dizziness washed over her, causing her to grip the edge of the desk for support. The sensation lasted only a moment, and she dismissed it as standing too quickly. The drive to the children's hospital proceeded without incident. Camilla enjoyed these visits immensely, finding genuine joy in meeting young patients and their families. She had always possessed a natural warmth that put people at ease, especially children who might otherwise be intimidated by royal protocol. Today's visit was particularly special. She was opening a new cardiac wing that would save countless young lives. Inside the hospital corridors, Camilla moved gracefully from room to room, stopping to chat with patients, parents, and medical staff. Her genuine interest in each person's story had always been one of her greatest strengths as a working royal. She listened intently as a 7-year-old boy explained his upcoming surgery, offering words of encouragement that came from the heart rather than any prepared script. During the formal opening ceremony, Camilla stood before a gathered crowd of medical professionals, hospital administrators, and local dignitaries. As she began her prepared remarks about the importance of pediatric cardiac care, something strange happened. The words on her speech seemed to blur together, and for a moment, she couldn't remember the next sentence. She paused, smiled graciously, and continued from memory. But the brief lapse troubled her. After cutting the ribbon and posing for photographs, Camilla excused herself for a brief rest in the administrator's office. She sat quietly, pressing her fingertips to her temples. The headache that had been building slowly throughout the morning was becoming more pronounced. Her assistant offered to reschedule the afternoon's charity luncheon, but Camilla waved away the suggestion. She had never been one to disappoint people who were counting on her presence. The charity luncheon took place at a historic London hotel, where Camilla was the guest of honor for an organization supporting military families. She had been patron of this particular charity for over a decade and knew many of the attendees personally. As she worked the room before lunch, greeting familiar faces and thanking volunteers for their dedication, she felt increasingly unwell. During the meal, Camilla found herself struggling to follow conversations. The voices around her seemed distant, as if she were hearing them from underwater. When called upon to give impromptu remarks, she managed to speak coherently, but internally she felt confused and disoriented. Several guests later commented that she seemed unusually quiet, though they attributed it to fatigue from her busy schedule. As the afternoon wore on, Camilla's condition deteriorated subtly but steadily. Her speech became slightly slurred, though so minimally that only those who knew her very well might notice. Her coordination was slightly off. She knocked over a water glass while reaching for her purse, something that would normally never happen given her years of practiced grace at public events. The drive back to Clarence's house was a relief. Camilla leaned back against the leather seats and closed her eyes, hoping that rest would remedy whatever was troubling her. She had survived decades of public life, weathered personal scandals, and emerged stronger. Whatever was happening now, she was determined to handle it with the same resilience that had carried her through previous challenges. Upon arriving home, Camilla went directly to her private sitting room and asked not to be disturbed unless absolutely necessary. She settled into her favorite armchair, the one Charles had given her for her birthday several years ago. The fabric was a soft blue that matched her eyes, and sitting in it always brought her comfort. She tried to read, but the words on the page wouldn't stay in focus. Charles was away on official business, representing the crown at a state funeral in Europe. They had spoken briefly by phone that morning, before her day began, their conversation filled with the comfortable intimacy of a couple who had weathered many storms together. She missed his presence acutely now, wishing she could discuss her concerning symptoms with someone who knew her so completely. As evening approached, Camilla's personal maid knocked softly and entered with a dinner tray. The smell of food, usually appealing, made her feel nauseated. She managed only a few sips of soup before pushing the tray away. Her maid, who had worked for the family for many years, noticed that Her Royal Highness seemed unwell and gently suggested calling the royal physician. Camilla insisted she was simply tired and would feel better after a good night's sleep. She had always been reluctant to make a fuss about minor health concerns, viewing such complaints as weaknesses unbefitting someone in her position. The royal family had a long tradition of maintaining a stiff upper lip, and she had embraced that philosophy wholeheartedly throughout her years of public service. That night, Camilla prepared for bed with her usual routine, though every movement required more effort than usual. As she looked at herself in the mirror while removing her jewelry, she noticed that her face appeared slightly asymmetrical. One side seemed to droop almost imperceptibly. She attributed it to exhaustion and the harsh bathroom lighting, telling herself that a full night's rest would restore her usual appearance. Sleep came fitfully. Camilla drifted in and out of consciousness, troubled by strange dreams and a persistent headache that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Several times during the night, she woke feeling disoriented and confused about where she was. Each time, reality gradually returned, and she settled back into an uneasy slumber. By morning, her condition had worsened significantly, though she didn't fully comprehend the severity of her situation. When her maid arrived with the morning tea tray, she found Camilla struggling to speak clearly. The words she wanted to say seemed trapped somewhere between her mind and her mouth, coming out jumbled and incomplete. The maid immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and called for help, but precious time had already been lost. The symptoms that had begun so subtly the previous morning had progressed throughout the night into something far more dangerous. As medical professionals would later explain, timing was crucial in these situations, and every minute that passed reduced the chances of a full recovery. The emergency call went out at 7:30 in the morning. Camilla's personal maid, Margaret, had found her mistress attempting to get dressed, but unable to coordinate her movements properly. When Margaret asked if she was feeling well, Camilla tried to respond but could only produce garbled sounds that bore little resemblance to actual words. The panic in Camilla's eyes told Margaret everything she needed to know. Within minutes, Clarence House transformed into a hub of urgent activity. Margaret immediately contacted the household security, who in turn alerted the royal protection officers and the palace medical team. The royal physician, Dr. Harrison, was roused from his own morning routine and informed that he needed to reach Clarence House immediately. The gravity in Margaret's voice left no doubt that this was a genuine medical emergency. Dr. Harrison arrived within 20 minutes, his medical bag in hand and his mind already running through possible diagnoses based on the symptoms described over the phone. He found Camilla sitting on the edge of her bed, still in her nightgown, looking confused and frightened. Her left arm hung limply at her side, and when he asked her to smile, only the right side of her mouth responded properly. The diagnosis was swift and devastating. Camilla was experiencing a stroke, and from the severity of her symptoms, Dr. Harrison suspected it was a significant one. He immediately called for an ambulance while beginning preliminary treatment. Every second counted now, and he knew that the window for effective intervention was rapidly closing. As they waited for the ambulance, Dr. Harrison tried to keep Camilla calm while assessing the full extent of her condition. She seemed to understand what was happening around her, but her ability to communicate was severely compromised. When she tried to speak, only fragments of words emerged, mixed with sounds that made no sense. The frustration in her eyes was heartbreaking to witness. Margaret held Camilla's hand, whispering reassurances while trying to mask her own terror. She had worked for the royal household for over 15 years and had never witnessed anything this frightening. The woman who had always been so articulate, so composed under pressure, was now struggling to form even the simplest words. The ambulance arrived with its lights flashing but sirens silent, as per royal protocol to avoid attracting unnecessary media attention. The paramedics were briefed quickly by Dr. Harrison as they prepared Camilla for transport. She was conscious but clearly struggling, her eyes darting between the faces surrounding her, as if seeking someone who wasn't there. During the rushed journey to the hospital, one of the paramedics attempted to gather information about any medications Camilla was taking and her recent medical history. Dr. Harrison provided what details he could, but much of Camilla's medical information was confidential and would need to be accessed through secure channels once they reached the hospital. Meanwhile, palace officials were making urgent phone calls to locate Charles, who was attending a memorial service in Belgium. The delicate task of informing him about his wife's condition fell to his private secretary, who had to balance the urgency of the situation with the need for discretion. Charles was in the middle of laying a wreath when he received the coded message that required his immediate attention. The call came through on his secure phone during a brief break in the ceremony. Charles stepped away from the other dignitaries, his face grave as he listened to the details. The words, stroke, and serious condition hit him like physical blows. Without hesitation, he informed his host that he needed to return to London immediately due to a family emergency. Back at the hospital, Camilla was rushed into the emergency department where a team of specialists was already assembled. The neurology team had been alerted during her transport, and they were prepared to begin immediate assessment and treatment. Time was now measured in minutes, and everyone involved understood the stakes. The head neurologist, Dr. Sarah Chen, took charge of Camilla's care. She was one of the leading stroke specialists in the country and had treated numerous high-profile patients, though none quite as prominent as the Queen Consort. Her reputation for remaining calm under pressure and achieving excellent outcomes had earned her the respect of colleagues and patients alike. Initial scans revealed the extent of the damage. A blood clot had blocked a major artery in Camilla's brain, cutting off oxygen to critical areas responsible for speech and motor function. The medical team immediately began discussing treatment options, knowing that each passing minute reduced the likelihood of a full recovery. Dr. Chen explained to the attending physician that they were now beyond the optimal window for some treatments, but there were still interventions that could help minimize long-term damage. The decision was made to proceed with emergency procedures to try to restore blood flow to the affected area of Camilla's brain. As Camilla was prepared for the procedure, she seemed to sense the urgency surrounding her. Though she couldn't speak properly, her eyes remained alert and intelligent. When a nurse asked if there was anyone she wanted them to call, Camilla managed to whisper one word with tremendous effort: Charles. Charles. The nursing staff assured her that her husband was being contacted and would be with her as soon as possible. This seemed to provide some comfort, and she closed her eyes, conserving her energy for the fight ahead. The medical team worked with practiced efficiency, knowing that they were treating someone whose condition would soon become international news. Charles's journey back to London was agonizing. His aircraft couldn't fly fast enough, and every minute felt like an hour. He sat rigidly in his seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his mind racing with worry and regret. He should have been there. He should have noticed that something was wrong during their last phone conversation. The weight of guilt and fear pressed down on him like a physical burden. His staff worked frantically to clear his schedule and manage the inevitable media inquiries that would follow once news of Camilla's hospitalization leaked. The palace press office prepared carefully worded statements that acknowledged a medical situation while respecting the family's privacy during this difficult time. Back in the hospital, the medical procedure began. Dr. Chen and her team worked with meticulous precision, using advanced imaging to guide their instruments through Camilla's circulatory system to reach the clot. The procedure was delicate and dangerous, but it represented the best hope for limiting the permanent damage from the stroke. Hours passed as the medical team fought to save what they could of Camilla's neurological function. Outside the operating room, Margaret waited anxiously, having been given special permission to remain at the hospital. She clutched a small prayer book that she always carried, whispering words of hope and faith. The procedure concluded in the early afternoon, with mixed results. Dr. Chen was able to partially restore blood flow, but significant damage had already occurred. The full extent of Camilla's recovery would not be known for days or possibly weeks. She was moved to intensive care, where monitors tracked every aspect of her vital signs. Charles's plane finally touched down at a London airport, where a security detail waited to rush him to the hospital. The usually composed prince looked haggard and worried as he was whisked through empty corridors toward the woman he loved. His greatest fear was that he might arrive too late to say goodbye. Charles arrived at the hospital as the afternoon light was beginning to fade. His security detail had cleared the corridors in advance, allowing him to move quickly through the building without encountering other patients or visitors. The usually unflappable prince showed visible signs of distress, his tie askew and his hair disheveled from the urgent journey across Europe. Dr. Chen met him outside the intensive care unit, her expression carefully neutral but compassionate. She had delivered difficult news to families countless times throughout her career. But speaking to a member of the royal family about his wife's condition presented unique challenges. Every word needed to be precise, honest, and sensitive to both the medical reality and the emotional impact. The neurologist explained that while they had been able to partially restore blood flow to Camilla's brain, significant damage had already occurred during the hours between the onset of symptoms and treatment. The areas of the brain responsible for speech and motor control on the left side of her body had been severely affected. Recovery would be a long and uncertain process, with no guarantees about how much function might return. Charles listened intently, his face growing paler with each medical detail. When Dr. Chen mentioned that Camilla's ability to speak was severely compromised, he closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. The woman who had been his closest companion and confidant for decades might never again be able to share her thoughts clearly with him. As they approached Camilla's room, Dr. Chen prepared Charles for what he was about to see. His wife was conscious but weak, surrounded by monitors and medical equipment. Her appearance might be shocking, and he should be prepared for the possibility that she might not immediately recognize him or be able to respond normally to his presence. The room was dimly lit, with only the soft glow from various medical monitors breaking the shadows. Camilla lay propped up slightly in the hospital bed, her eyes closed, breathing steadily with the help of supplemental oxygen. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that tracked her heart rate, blood pressure, and brain activity. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the severity of her condition. Charles moved slowly to her bedside, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out to touch her arm. At his gentle touch, Camilla's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, there was confusion in her gaze as she tried to focus on the figure beside her. Then, gradually, recognition dawned, and her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and anguish. She tried to speak, her mouth moving silently at first as she struggled to form words. Charles leaned closer, encouraging her to take her time, telling her that he was there and that everything would be all right. Finally, with tremendous effort that was painful to witness, she managed to whisper his name. Charles. The word was slurred and barely audible, but it was unmistakably his name. Tears filled Charles's eyes as he heard her voice, changed though it was. He took her hand in both of his, careful not to disturb the IV lines, and spoke softly to her about how worried he had been and how glad he was to be with her now. She squeezed his hand weakly, the gesture carrying all the communication that words could not provide. Over the following hours, Charles remained at her bedside, leaving only when medical staff needed to perform examinations or procedures. He watched as neurologists tested her responses, checking her ability to follow simple commands, and assessing the extent of paralysis on her left side. Each test revealed the sobering reality of how much the stroke had taken from her. Margaret brought personal items from Clarence's house, Camilla's favorite pillow, a small, framed photograph of their wedding day, and the prayer book that had provided comfort during the long hours of waiting. These familiar objects seemed to bring Camilla some peace, though her ability to express appreciation was severely limited. The medical team established a careful routine of assessments, medications, and therapies designed to support whatever recovery might be possible. Speech therapists began working with Camilla almost immediately, starting with basic exercises to help her relearn how to control the muscles involved in speaking. The process was frustratingly slow and exhausting for someone accustomed to articulate expression. News of Camilla's condition gradually became public, though palace officials released only carefully worded statements. about a medical situation requiring ongoing treatment. The media speculation was intense, but the family's privacy was largely respected during these critical early days. Flowers and cards began arriving from well-wishers around the world. Though Camilla was not yet aware of this outpouring of support, as the days passed, small signs of progress emerged. Camilla began to stay awake for longer periods, and her attempts at speech became slightly more successful. Simple words like yes, no, and Charles became easier for her to produce. Though complex thoughts remained trapped inside her mind, unable to find expression through damaged neural pathways, the most heartbreaking moments came when Camilla would become frustrated with her inability to communicate. Charles would see the intelligence and awareness in her eyes, knowing that her mind was still sharp even though her body could no longer obey her commands. During these episodes, he would hold her hand and speak calmly, reminding her that healing would take time and patience. Physical therapy began as soon as medical staff determined it was safe. The left side of Camilla's body remained weak and uncoordinated, requiring her to relearn basic movements that had once been automatic. Simple tasks like lifting her arm or moving her leg required tremendous concentration and effort. The woman who had once moved through public engagements with grace and poise now struggled with the most basic physical functions. Charles arranged his schedule to spend as much time as possible at the hospital. Official duties were postponed or handled by other family members, and his staff worked to manage the complex logistics of running a royal household, while its central figures dealt with this medical crisis. The normal rhythm of royal life was suspended as everyone focused on Camilla's recovery. Dr. Chen provided regular updates on Camilla's progress, always honest about both improvements and continuing challenges. She explained that stroke recovery was often measured in months and years rather than days and weeks. Some functions might return partially or completely, while others might be permanently lost. Only time would reveal the full extent of what could be recovered. During quiet moments in the hospital room, Charles would read to Camilla from books they both enjoyed or share news about family and friends. Sometimes, she would smile slightly in response, and occasionally she would manage a word or two. These small victories became precious milestones in their new reality, celebrated by the medical staff who had grown fond of both patients. The neurologist emphasized that Camilla's recovery would depend not only on medical treatment but also on her determination and the support of those around her. The woman who had shown such resilience throughout her public life would need to draw on that same strength as she faced this most personal and difficult challenge. With Charles beside her and a dedicated medical team supporting her, she began the long journey toward whatever recovery might be possible. As the first week concluded, Camilla remained hospitalized but stable. Her condition had stabilized, though significant challenges lay ahead. The stroke had changed everything about their lives together, but Charles remained committed to supporting her through whatever came next. Their love story would continue, written now in whispered words and gentle touches, as they faced an uncertain future together.